Well, hey everyone, and welcome to episode number 101 of the Other Six Podcast. My name is Chad Boken. I am your host. Joining me once again in the studio, my co-host, our student pastor, the man who ran in front of a car and got tired. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matt Aldridge. Matt, how are you today, sir?
I have been hit by a car before.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like absolutely. My first job at I was 16 years old, and I was working at Chick-fil-A, and I was picking up trash in the parking lot, and a car got really mad in the drive-thru, pulled me around, and all of a sudden, in a flash of lightning and God's mercy or something, I don't know, I am on the front end of a 2016 Honda Civic.
Wow. So you got tired.
Yeah, I literally got hit.
If you had been backed into, you would have been exhausted.
The best part of that was I roll off and I know that I made a dent, and they just drove away.
They just drove away. I was about to say, if what kind of car?
Honda Civic.
Oh yeah.
You versus a Civic, I'm taking you every single time.
Just drove away.
Joining us also in the studio today, our lead pastor, Mr. Jim Botts. Jim, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, better than our esteemed colleague.
Yeah, I feel like we need to really unpack that.
There's a lot.
It was all right.
Yeah.
I'm picturing that Civic. Not good.
I probably would have panicked, drove away too.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie.
Absolutely.
I probably would have.
There's a gentleman in our small group that has a great story. When he was young, he got run over by a herd of sheep, and so he tells that story. It's Michael. It's Harper's fiance who they're getting married.
I have heard that story. I have heard that story.
It is one of the funniest stories. So if we could ever get him on the podcast to tell it,
Trampled by sheep.
Yeah.
There's a sermon illustration in that.
Yeah, that's right.
Sounds like it could be cozy almost. With all that. I mean, I don't know.
It's just fluffy, a bunch of sheep.
I've seen that soda commercial.
He fell asleep immediately. You know, like that was. He was like, "How many am I getting hit by? 1, 2." You know, that's what it was. But no, anyway.
Man.
Oh my goodness. Well, gentlemen, kind of an interesting thing. We're recording this a few days later on a Wednesday.
Yep.
I was gonna unpack the reason for our listeners as to our delay, but really the real reason's pretty boring. So I would like for them to leave it to their imagination as to what Lord of the Rings-esque quest we might have been on that caused a delay in the podcast. Because normally, I mean, we don't miss one. I mean,
there's a reason that port thing's going down.
That's right.
I'm not saying it's
and
us.
we did everything we could to either prevent it or cause it, right? Yeah. No, my mom called me like a few minutes ago, and she's like, "Hey, Costco and Sam's are out of toilet paper, so you might want to run by the store and grab some toilet paper." And I'm like, can we as a society not do this again? So like, from the Other Six Podcast, can we implore you, do not feel the urge to run to the store and grab toilet paper, no matter how many packs you see in the back of my truck right now. Like, don't do that. So I guess this port thing's, it's who knows. But regardless, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Gentlemen, how was your week? What'd you get up to? Matt, we'll start with you.
As the resident Alabama fan at this table,
here we go.
I had a great weekend.
I really wanted to avoid any football talk after the Auburn-Oklahoma game. So
you had to ask.
The Alabama-Georgia game, I think that's game of the year, man.
Far.
And you were there.
I was about to say, I was there. We were
awesome.
lucky enough, me and my wife, Jessie, and our next gen resident, Emily Alderman, her husband, Will, who just passed the bar. So
congratulations, Will. Well done, buddy. Shout out to Michael Webb as well. Our friend Michael that serves here on Force. Yep.
So just kind of as like a celebration, as a gift to that, and I was like, you know what? Let's go to Tuscaloosa. This feels like a once in a lifetime opportunity. They're Georgia fans, so I was like, this is really going to test this is going to test our friendship. We're going to see like how well this is.
Home in separate cars, so you came together.
No, that's the thing. Is somebody texted me afterwards. Essentially, like it was Sunday morning, and they said, "Hey, how did everything go?"
Right.
And they said, "Did Will and Emily did y'all fight on the way?" And I was like, "Well." They left early, so it was fine.
Wasn't much of a fight.
They missed the 15 seconds that Georgia was in the lead.
When they left, Georgia was losing, and then they were winning, and then Alabama, just this 11-year-old that's out there catching footballs, or however old he is out there just, I mean, a boy amongst the rest of the men, and you can't catch him. And so it was just a fantastic game. I've been to a lot of games in Tuscaloosa, and it was one of the greatest atmospheres I've ever been in. So
I can't even imagine. I mean, as an Auburn fan, I really can't imagine. But no, Auburn's got great atmosphere, but just winning, that would have been nice. But no, that's good for you guys, man. That's like core memory, kind of experience.
So if I wasn't worth anything on Sunday, it was not because of you. It was because I got home at 2 a.m. Singing Dixieland Delight. So.
Yeah. Well, I can't say that I'm happy Alabama won, but man, what a great experience for you. I'm glad that you had a great time. And Jim, how about you? How was your weekend? How's your week been?
Man, I did the exact opposite. So we actually did chores around the house, and I'm impressed with my wife's skills. So I had a handful of things I needed to do, and I'm like, okay, I'll just do them. And then Hardy stopped by to we had a table that needed to be like sanded, and he was giving us some advice on what to do, and he started sanding it. Next thing you know, Rose has him on a ladder installing a ceiling fan that required some support from the attic side. So he's up in the attic. I'm like, she's good. My gosh, she is good. And I'm glad because I wasn't installing it. So anyway.
Oh, man.
So I was trying to do some chores, but I ended up watching Hardy do some of them. So it was kind of fun.
Shout out to Hardy and all of his handy.
Amazing.
By the time people come to church and see, they put some new columns up outside in the coffee bar.
Yeah,
they were swimming
him
out
and his
the front
teams.
sign this morning.
They were cleaning out the sign.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been doing. He and his teams.
Yeah.
So shout out to all of our amazing volunteers once
our
again.
facilities team's incredible.
Just out there doing all kinds of woodworking and cleaning up.
Looks amazing.
Yeah, it's kind
I
of
want to go
great.
swimming in the sign. That'd be so much fun.
You don't need to let your dreams be dreams on that. I think you would be
It gets
perfectly
hot
fine.
around here.
Yeah, just wait until it cools off a little bit more. It's starting.
Okay.
I feel like you can
Yeah, it's
start to
getting there.
feel it. It's October now.
Yep.
So it's arriving a little bit, but not quite here all the way. Yeah, we didn't do a whole lot this weekend either. We did watch the Auburn Oklahoma game, and it was funny. A buddy of mine texted me afterwards, and he was like, "I can't believe that happened." I'm like, as an Auburn fan, if you had hope at any point during that game, this is your fault. It's all completely on you.
Yeah, you caused it.
You guys have got to stop turning the ball over.
I was
We
watching
only did it once.
Well, I know, but
that's
still.
improvement from the week before.
I was thinking, you're actually going to win this game. You're
Nope.
actually going to win this game. How
Wrong.
naive am I?
Wrong.
Listen, I've been an Auburn fan my whole life. When he threw that pick for a touchdown,
Over.
no surprise.
Yeah.
No, I just wasn't surprised.
Dude,
I'm like,
when they scan the audience looking at the fans,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm a Chicago fan. I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah, you
I've
know
seen
it.
that. There's
oh
the
my
dude.
goodness!
There it is.
But no, I mean it is fall. It's college football, so of course we're going to talk about that a lot. But it is starting to cool off a little bit. We're kind of moving on,
Thank you,
and
Lord.
we're into the official Burr months: October, November, December. And but I don't want to let the event pass us without celebrating some unconventional holidays that we missed over the
okay.
past week.
Don't wanna miss
So
those.
September 25th, last week, World Pharmacist Day.
Oh, right.
So
Cheers.
shout out to pharmacists.
I've got a couple of pharmacist friends.
Yeah. Now, what's really funny is if you've ever known any folks that work in rural pharmacies, I've known a few of them, and they basically, the people that live in those areas almost treat them like the doctor. So they'll call it, but hey, this weird thing's happening, and they have to have this crazy, weird collection of knowledge. So shout out to all of our pharmacists. We appreciate the correct dosages of medicine being done on time.
Yes, we do.
September 27th was World Tourism Day. So I would ask you, gentlemen, if you could go any one place in the world to celebrate World Tourism Day, where would it be, Jim? Where would you like to go?
Alicante, Spain.
Okay. Very specific.
Mountains and beautiful ocean all in the same spot.
Have you been there before?
No, but I saw a series that was shot there, and every time they started rolling
Yeah.
B-roll, I'm like, oh, I got to be there.
That's
I gotta
where I
go
want to
there.
go.
Oh, yeah, totally.
There you go. Matt?
Probably Greece.
Okay.
Like me and my wife really want to do Greece. And
Santorini?
Yeah,
Is that the name of it?
all
Yeah.
the, I just to tour through different places, all of it, and just all on the coast and stuff. I really do a Paul's missionary journey
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah,
while also
yeah,
enjoying because some of those places are really beautiful too.
Yeah.
So I love history, love church history, and getting to explore that side of things.
So you got to get into
also.
Turkey too,
Yeah,
Ephesus, Antioch,
all of
that.
it, all of that. I really
Yeah,
want
you
to
look
do
at
that.
those places and you look at Paul's journeys, you're like, it's pretty sweet.
Right.
He would not give it that exact.
They might have been trying to kill him the entire time.
I had
but,
changed
but yeah,
when I came
yeah.
through the area, but
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, if I had, I think Rome would be at the top of my list. Where,
yeah.
Israel would be, but there's that
Eternal
whole
city.
war happening there right now.
Yeah,
so
right now
I
is
think,
not a good time.
I think Rome would be a good place to go. I hear they have good pizza.
Eternal city.
Funnily enough, on September 30th, so Monday, when we would have been recording this, was, and I kid you not, International Podcast Day.
No way.
That's-
Absolutely.
And we
They
will.
got us. That's why we
Gentlemen,
took it off.
We will.
That's why.
In honor of the day.
We have dropped the ball. When I saw that, I laughed so hard the fact that we missed doing a podcast on
That's
International
insane.
Podcast Day. And then October 1st, which was yesterday, International Coffee Day. So I know you're not such
I
a
call
fan.
that every day.
That's right. Yeah, you celebrate International Coffee Day
all
on
day,
a
every
consistent
day.
I feel like the moment I start drinking coffee is the moment that I have to grow up, and I just don't think
Don't
that I'm
wanna
ready
go
to do.
there.
I don't think I want to do that
Yeah,
yet.
yeah. For
Stay young.
years, I just said it was bean water. That's what it was, boiled bean water, and I wasn't such a fan. But then I discovered you put stuff in it to make it taste really
I
good.
feel like that's cheating. If I want to be good at drinking it, I want to drink it just absolutely in the raw. Like that's
how
what
I
I want.
do it.
And I don't think I can do that
That's
at
how
all.
I
Well,
drink
like I've had
coffee.
friends who are like, "Hey, here, taste this. There's subtle hints of blueberry," and
No.
I'm like, "It tastes like beans." Like
Yeah,
I don't,
it's
I don't,
earthy
Oh,
notes
it's
of
yeah,
whatever.
I'm like,
Yeah.
well, it tastes.
I don't
like
have a
coffee.
refined palate. You know, I
Me
guess.
neither.
So,
My
You need a
palate's
drip.
about
Someone
as
told me they need a
refined
drip.
as sod. It's like,
but yeah,
not
International
really.
Coffee Day. So, so gentlemen, I know you celebrated, and I know that you probably just
I definitely
ran
did.
ahead. So
I just smell of coffee.
Yeah,
so
that smells
I'd
good.
sniff it.
There you go. he
Scratch
sniffs.
it,
He doesn't
sniff it.
imbibe. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of jokes we could go with that.
Yeah,
that we
there
won't.
is. Yes.
But no, so lots of good days, lots of good holidays, and a great day this past weekend at Vaughn Forest Church kicked off a brand new message series.
Yep.
Oops, did I marry the wrong person?
We had people like calling us up at the church.
Oh,
going,
yeah.
Hey, what's going on? Like, are you trying to break up marriages and stuff?
Yeah.
And Not really.
Yeah, one individual called, was like, "Hey, what's this all about?" And I love our secretary. She's like, "I think you need to be here," Like, so anyway, but no. So let's talk about that because we're kind of making a few jokes. But what was it that said, "Hey, we need to do a entire 5-week series on this topic of marriage"? What was kind of the locus of
Well, just as pastors in a local church, we have a lot of families are struggling, a lot of marriages are struggling. They're struggling everywhere. And we live in a military town, so you can take the stats on struggling marriages and double that. So there's just a lot of struggle. And because there's a lot of struggle, we just always want to stay ahead of it and equip our church family and just want to get ahead of it. And we also realize in our community there's a lot of struggling marriages too. So let's take some time. Let's dive into God's word together. And let's do it in such a way that anybody from the community could come and be like, "Oh, this makes sense to me." So that's why we chose the frame that we chose.
Yeah, and that's not really just theory. I mean, when we did those burden cards a couple of months ago, there were a couple of, I would say probably 3 or 4 themes that were consistent to 90+% of the cards, and marriage was one of those themes.
I did not read one of those marriage-related burdens that was like, "Oh, they're struggling." It was way heavier.
Right.
It was like very specific kind of pain where you're like, well, betrayal or brokenness or abandonment or just all of that.
Right.
And it's significant. And so, we're just like, man, we just got to get into this. So.
Yeah, and the good news is God's word has a lot to say on the topic of
He
our
happened
marriages.
to have invented it. So,
That's right. He's the author.
Let's
so
go
he
to the
knows.
inventor and
That's
see
right.
what he meant. Yeah.
So I want to kind of kick off our discussion today talking about the big idea from the day. I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get it right. That God designed marriage not for our personal fulfillment, but for our mutual development. And so as we begin discussing this, I really want to talk about how does that, best play out in our marriages? Does that mean that we're supposed to have conflict in our marriages so that we can overcome them? Help me understand that.
Oh, you'll have conflict. So it doesn't, No, the idea of Genesis 2, when we see the first wedding, the first marriage put together, what was God's goal? It wasn't personal fulfillment. So I go into marriage so that my spouse can meet my needs. And one of the things we kept saying is that expectation and disappointment go hand in hand. When you expect your spouse to meet every need, they're not going to be able to do it. No one can meet every need. Some of
As
your
an
needs,
Auburn fan, I get that.
you are
Expectation
there.
and disappointment,
That's
right?
just, as soon as you get your hopes up,
That's right.
crash.
Exactly.
Here they
Yeah.
go. But in our culture, we go into marriage thinking that person will solve my problems. Like they'll love me in a way I've never been loved. And some of that's true, but it's also not true sometimes too. So the tongue-in-cheek approach to the series is, oops, did I marry the wrong person? Well, if you married someone that you think is always going to make you feel special, you did marry the wrong person, because there are times your imperfect spouse will make you feel not special. There are times they're not going to listen to you. They're going to argue with you. You're going to have so expectation, disappointment goes hand in hand. So if our approach toward marriage is that it's the place where our needs are met, that's not God's design. God did not design marriage to meet your needs. He designed marriage to grow you up.
Okay.
So for the spouses who unite in holy matrimony, it becomes the locus of your discipleship.
Gotcha.
Jesus said, "What God joined together, let no man separate." To literally become one. And if you're one, there's not 2 versions of discipleship going on. There's one. So now you're walking that path together.
Right.
And that's hard. It's hard to grow with another person. It's hard to become what God intended alongside another person.
Right.
So all the things that we look at, one of the, and we'll talk about this later in the series, you can solve most of your marriage problems by just applying Christianity 101 in your marriage. Everything about Christianity 101 solves your marriage.
Yeah.
The golden rule. If you do unto that other person as you would have them do unto you, you would not have certain problems in your marriage.
Right.
Keep on going. Christianity 101. If you were to love the person, your spouse, as your enemy, what are you supposed to do for your enemy? love them, pray for them, bless them, and do good to them.
Right.
So if you treated them like an enemy when you're fighting, then you would love them, bless them, pray for them, do good to them.
Right.
If you applied Christianity 101 just in your marriage, you have a totally different marriage.
Wow.
So that's literally what we're talking about, is like your marriage is where God's like work in your heart takes root in relationships. It's primarily with your spouse as the first place for that to happen. So if you're going into it for your needs to be met, that's just not what it is. That's like trying to take out a screw with a butter knife.
Right.
That butter knife is not designed to take screws out. It could kind of work, but you'll damage it. So anyway, so the basic idea is, once you understand that God puts two people together in that sense for their growth and development as a big part of that, man, that's different from meet my needs.
So let me ask you this then: if marriage is such a big way that God develops us, because again, you grow when there's resistance, right? I mean, a lot of the time.
Yes,
does that mean that everyone is supposed to be married, or is that is this an option? I mean, help me understand.
I think it's one of the huge oversights in American Christianity. We elevate marriage. And to the point where if people aren't married, we're like, oh, you're not living the ideal life. It's like, that's not in the Bible at all. So, for example, if being in marriage is the ultimate fulfillment of being a human being, what do we make of Jesus then? He was not married. Never going to be married. In Matthew 19, in a marriage text, he talks about some who are born and made eunuchs, who for the sake of the kingdom, that's the life they choose. Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 makes a sustained argument that singleness is the best place to be fully devoted to God, because you don't have a horizontal devotion to a spouse. So the idea of marriage is the ideal. If you're not married, you miss the ideal. That's not number one, not in the Bible. That's bad theology, because then that will cause us to view as a lower state of being singleness. And I think churches, in our attempt to keep the marriage value high and have a good, strong, high view of marriage, we have a low view of singleness. And so very few churches do a great job speaking to singleness as a way to be a kingdom-oriented person. We don't even have a concept for it. Yet single people sit in church and struggle constantly because there's no reference points to their reality. So yeah, God calls some. So if you are united in a marriage covenant, then you have a helper. As we talked about from Genesis 2, that helper is to help you grow into God's purpose for your life and for their life, and so that growth is together. But if you're not in marriage, you still have a helper. The Ezer that we talked about is God himself, and so still have a purpose. So churches really don't have a sensitivity to singleness. I wish, I'm always trying to do a better job of that as we speak about things in series that we do, and remembering that singleness is a way to honor God. Singleness is a way to serve the kingdom. So it's not like marriage is here, single here. So.
And we've said this series, whether you are married, were married, single, not yet married, anyway, like there's something in the series for.
We're trying to do that every week. So this week we're talking about the husband's role coming up. So it's like, hey, if you're a single woman, what do you make of this? This is how you look at the bozos that are coming after you. Or if you're a guy and you're not married yet, don't take your cues of the culture around you, what Mr. Right is. Look at what the Bible portrait is and go, that's actually the goal, not Matthew McConaughey or some other version, So, I mean, we're trying to, help everybody see, even if you're not in this text, you're in this text.
That's good.
So when you're talking about how, like, the whole idea is for two different individuals to, like, come together and fulfill that same purpose or fulfill a purpose. We talked through some of the back end of Genesis chapter 1, where God gives Adam dominion over earth. And even when you hear the word dominion, you kind of get like hackles, you kind of tense up a little bit, because you feel like it feels like those two things are going to be incredibly combative, walking together hand in hand, two become one. But then one of them having dominion over the other. It doesn't how does that add up? Because quickly a lot of pastors, or even just the way you understand it, because it can be confusing because you hear that word and it's like, I don't know what to do with this. It's like, okay, well, someone's in charge, and that what is that? What is that charge? What's that leadership? And why do I have to do what he says, or why do I have to do what she said, or whatever? So like, how do we reckon that verse with still being two become one, walking in the direction?
This is where exegesis and hermeneutics matter, right?
So it's the Genesis 2:24 that the man leaves his father's mother, unites his wife, two become one flesh. So two become one. The battle comes in when it's like, well, which one? Who's going to be the one? Right? So that's going to be the issue. So what we looked at, we could sketch it real quick, but what we looked at in Genesis 1:27 was on the sixth day of creation when God created humanity. he spoke over them. So it says God created, in verse 27, man in his own image, in the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Verse 28, God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over literally everything that moves on the earth. The cultural mandate from God to humans was given to humanity to have dominion. So human beings, image bearers, have dominion. Dominus, that's the Lord in Latin, that's a ruling word. God has always had his purpose to rule over his creation through his human partners, right? So in Genesis 1, the male was not given dominion over the female. The female was not given dominion over the male. Humanity was given dominion over all things, all living things. The problem with some theologies of marriage is that they start their theology in Genesis 3. And in Genesis 3, where the fall happens, we get the description when the fallout is being meted out.
Birth pains.
Yeah,
and all,
exactly.
Yeah,
birth pains for sure. And then you also get, where are we? 16, I'll multiply your pain in childbearing. God tells Eve, your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. The he ruling over you, that's not creational. That's the fall.
Yeah.
His desire to rule over you is a reflection of the fallenness of human beings.
That wasn't the original design.
That's not the design. Yeah. The design is humans, male and female, have dominion.
It's less like a declaratory. Like, this is not what the Lord's declaring. This is the fallout.
Yeah,
and I think the lens you looked at through
that's
makes that very different. It's like, hey, these are not the same kind of phrases.
Yep.
One is declaring what God has given to humans. The other is saying, hey, because of your sin,
here's the consequence.
Here's the consequence.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that we don't approach it with that. Like, I know that I have. Like, I hear that, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's, I'm going to rule over her, and she's going to all that.
Right.
And then it's like, it's not, I'm not looking at it
Jesse,
as,
I don't know how much you rule over her.
But
here's where it gets so tricky. This week, we're talking about the husband's role. And in Ephesians 5, wives, submit to your husband. Under the theology of marriage that begins in Genesis 3, not Genesis 1, it's like, well, yeah, he rules over her. So she submits to him. Of course, that's how it is. It's like, no, not at all. Number one, no one in Genesis 1 rules over anyone.
Yeah.
God rules over humanity. Humanity rules over humans. Don't rule over each other. Jesus made that clear. That the Gentiles lord over one another. Not so among you. My kingdom to work that. We're not doing the lording over. That's not how this works.
Right.
It's a creational thing too. But when you look at like Ephesians 5, we'll get to it next week. We'll really get into it. But the idea of submit to one another. It's like, wives, submit to your husbands. That's the second verse. That's verse 22, Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5:18 sets the whole section in order. So there's a lot of bad theology when we jump in the middle of a context and grab out a phrase and go, here we go, and it would connect dots to other parts of the Bible.
Yeah.
The reality is man was not given rule over the woman, period. Humans were given rule over God's creation. Number 3, desire for one human to rule another is a reflection of the fall and not God's creational intent at all.
Right.
Jesus sustained that in his conversations about the kingdom, and the Gentiles do it this way, but not so among you. I mean, it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
The submission is mutual submission, but it does first, mutual submission in Ephesians 5. And then Paul's like, okay, so for the wife, it looks like this.
Right.
Doesn't mean that's all there is. And right. So we'll get into some of that later. But there really is, within marriage, if marriage is a partnership of two people being united together, one man, one woman, one life shared for one lifetime, if we're united before God and under God, now our journeys come together. Now that's where God wants to grow us. I don't rule her. She doesn't really rule me. We work together, but we do have roles.
Right.
But we have to be careful when roles become rules.
Right.
Because then it's like, well, you can't do this. I'm supposed to do that. It's like, well, how about you use your gifts and be who you are? I use my gifts and be who I am. And together we make that work because that's how it's supposed to be.
Right.
So it's not like you're not supposed to do this because that's not your role. It's like roles weren't meant to be legalism as rules. Like, here's your lane, stay in it.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the role stuff, some of that's a product of more recent affluent Western society.
Absolutely correct.
This idea that, the man works and the wife's, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine.
That's right.
But you look at the reality of the majority of the world, like that's just not the reality of most of that. And so this idea of roles, I think that has more to do with our culture and less to, there are certainly roles and those things like that. But in terms of what people do on a daily basis in terms of husband and wives. A lot of that's just cultural influence, right?
And we see it in the epistles, the household codes. So in Ephesians 5, Paul is listing a household code. It's how Roman households work.
Right.
You go to Colossians, you see the same thing. So he's just basically running through their basic societal organization of how relationships work and showing how Jesus can rule over those now.
That's right.
So it's household code.
Yeah.
So every culture has their basic norms about how the rules should work.
Right.
So, we're filling those out with the creational intent, that God has for man and wife in the relationship. But that does not mean she only does this and he only does that. I mean,
And I think my point is, we need to be very careful assigning biblical values to cultural norms, because cultural norms are different around the globe.
That's right.
All right, I want to chase a theological rabbit trail here for just a second, if we can. This idea that, and if the answer to this is no, just tell me that and we'll move on. This idea that mankind is made in the image of God, so pre-fall, you've got mankind having dominion over the creation, ruling, subservient to the Lord, of course, but equal in the relationships, different. Is that a reflection then of like God and the Trinitarian relationship and that kind of stuff? So the idea that we are to have dominion over creation and this equal role, am I tracking there with that? That image is really more about, not necessarily how you look. It's the assignment that the Lord has given us to some extent.
Yeah, Michael Heiser does some good work on imaging. That's basically the idea is we are God's imagers.
Right.
And he looks at the ancient world that received the book of Genesis, and he was like, that any king who rules a vast domain would set up images throughout the domain that remind everyone who the real king is. He's like, that's the function of humanity. We are a sign and signification to all of creation. The ruler
we
doesn't
point
look
to the
like
king.
So we use our autonomy, we use love, we use our partnerships, we use creativity, we use all the functionality that we bring to it. Is it should be a reflection of God reigning and ruling over us. And it's his will, his purpose, his desire that we are executing out into the world.
And I guess from a Christological standpoint, like our marriages reflect the relationship of God with the church, right?
Yeah, that's this weekend, Ephesians 5.
Okay, all right, well there you go.
Huge, the mystery Paul calls
so
it.
we won't get too ahead on that.
Not too much.
So, all right,
we're going into it.
So at the end of your first point, you mentioned briefly that marriage is a covenant, not a contract. Now, I think a lot of us are very familiar with the idea of contract. We know what a contract is.
Yeah, we all have cell phones.
That's right, exactly. We all ignore the Apple terms and services.
Scroll.
I agree. Yeah, exactly. So we're very familiar with contracts, but I think the idea of covenant we may not be nearly as familiar with, and so. Two-part question, I guess. A, how and why do we treat our marriages so often like contracts? And then how should we be treating them like covenants?
I think we treat them like contracts because we don't know any better. We don't really know what the Bible says about the covenantal reality of marriage. We don't think that way. So we look at it like a human arrangement, which is a contract, strictly horizontal. It's like, I do my part, you do your part, this is what we agree to do. But then there's that sort of 50-50 mentality of I do mine, you do yours. If you're not doing yours, then hey, whoa, what's going on here? So it is strictly horizontally oriented.
Right.
That's the problem right there. Is we are, we're as imagers of God, we are to be vertically oriented. So when we look at the 10 commandments, the first 4, we're vertically oriented first, and then horizontally things flow out. So when it comes to looking at marriage and so forth, it can't be any different. It has to be vertical. And so a covenant would be the vow of husband and wife, not strictly to each other, but before God and unto God. So we're making a vow toward one another. We're also making it in light of God and his purpose for marriage. We're committing to God to fulfill his purpose for marriage with this person. So, contracts 50-50, human, oriented, very horizontal. Covenant is
quid pro quo.
Yeah,
contracts
very
very quid pro quo.
Yeah. And which really, honestly, there's the out piece, right? Where it says, if you don't do your part, then I'm out. So there's an out.
Right.
And so from a covenantal standpoint in the Bible, God's design did not have an out. Now, in Matthew 19, when Jesus is arguing with Pharisees and they're coming after him about the way they've created a lot of outs, Jesus is like, hey, look, in Deuteronomy 24, there is an out because of sin. sin created a thing where people will actually betray each other. And so being united to a person who is utterly self-destructive to you and to the marriage, God has an out for that. Not the purpose, but there is an out. So, the covenants are commitments. They're lifelong. They're unto God for God's purposes. And that's what marriage is supposed to be, covenantal. We commit to God for his purposes for this thing and a lifetime. We become what we're committed to. And if we genuinely become what we're committed to, then what do half-hearted commitments make us?
Yeah.
Less than what God intended. Yeah. So that's part of how marriage can really grow us into what God
And again,
intended.
you look at original design versus what it's become. The only reason that out was developed was because of the introduction of sin.
Yeah, Genesis 3 opens the door for all of their reasons to get out.
Man.
So when we're talking about again, two becoming one and working towards that same purpose and that same goal, the way you kind of phrase it over and over again was team, fill in the blank of your last name.
I like that.
Which is, I think it takes that, and again, these first couple of questions have kind of made it a really almost lofty idea, but when it comes down to this, it's like, hey, we kind of understand that concept. Like we get that.
Yeah, so Saturday night, you're cheering for your team. You spent money. Your heart's in it, every emotion in your body. Woo! Like you and your bride, you're all about it.
Yeah,
that's not bad to have a team pull your loyalty, your enthusiasm, your investment. I mean, that's not bad.
Right.
But what if team, your last name, Team Aldridge? What if you brought that same enthusiasm, investment, emotion, energy? What if you poured that same amount, both you and your bride together into that same thing? That'd be a different reality. Like you and Jesse would have a totally different marriage. You'd be treated like your favorite team. We're going to spend money on that team. We're going to throw our hearts in that thing. We're going to wear the jersey. We're going to bang on the wall.
You should make a Team Aldridge jersey.
Yeah. In fact, what we're doing this weekend is we're inviting our folks to hold up a little sign that says team with their last name, so their couples can get
photo
photos.
booth so you can
So the thing is, so I was doing marriage counseling years and years ago, and it's in North Texas, and the guy and the girl know him, love him, still know him and love him. He's just an old country boy. We're talking about a mule. This is a big mule-like man. And he's a simple guy, started his own concrete business where you level houses up and redo the foundation without having it's really cool. But anyway, he's created this business and it took off. And they were having all kinds of problems. And anyway, so they came in, we started doing marriage counseling. And as we're walking along, he's just not getting it. Like she's doing everything. She's doing half of his part. He's just not getting it. So finally, their last name, I'll just call it Smith because that's fine. That was the last name. And finally, at one point, I'm like, dude, you keep talking about where you're at and your thing, and she's over here carrying the load. I'm like, where's the team? So I threw his last name out there. I'm like, think about Team Smith. What's best for Team Smith? If what you're doing, tell me how what you're doing is best for Team Smith. You started thinking about, well, it does this. And he started thinking about it, and you can see the gears moving. It was like, I go, okay, what would you do differently for Team Smith rather than what you've been doing? Well, I probably would start doing the things we've been talking about, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden, it just clicked. He was like, then that's what I need to do. I need to get on with the team. I need to be about the team. And I was just, so it's one of those things that clicked in that moment. And I found through the years that that's a helpful way to think about your marriage should be team, whatever your last name is. So us, it's Team Bots. So whenever we're having an issue, a conflict, a season, doesn't matter. It's not what I want or what Rose wants, but what's best for Team Bots. That's what's best.
Yeah.
Am I fully participating in Team Bots?
Yeah.
There comes a time when I think every marriage you need to go through marriage counseling, not because it's bad, because you just want to get better. You want to tune it up. You want to find areas. We've done that many times in the past. We're probably overdue. We've had some transitions in the last year. We're overdue for another season like that. We would do that because that's what's best for Team Bots, not because I would like to do that or I want her to be different. It's just what's best for Team Bots. So good. Anyway, that's helpful.
Well, so if someone's wanting to take that first step and obviously the thing is you have to ask yourself the question and realize that, hey, I'm not really on the same team.
That's
or I'm not really functioning as a team.
And you're not alone, by the way.
Yeah,
that's
all
of us.
Obviously, self-awareness or just awareness in general of your situation is probably the first step. So let's say you've come to that point and that Sunday kind of that click, hey, I'm not doing this. This does not feel like a team at all. What's next?
I would look your spouse in the face and say, hey, how can I help more? Tell me what I can do to help us be more of a team. she has the answers. More than likely, it would be she. She has the answers. Meaning, it's the guy who's not quite fully engaged. Not all the time, but often. I would literally ask the question: how can I be more helpful? How can I? Is there an area in our marriage, or just some way where I'm just not really carrying the load? What can I do to help more? And it's not around the house. It's more than that. I mean, it could be that, but chances are good you're going to hear, well, all we ever do is, these things. It's like we don't date anymore, or we aren't investing in our hearts anymore. We're just like kind of roommates who live in the same house and we're raising these same kids. So I would ask the person directly because they know, and if they don't know, they'll start wrestling with what to say.
Yeah, and I do think there are some simple, practical things you can do. If you're a husband or a wife and you haven't emptied the trash or done the dishes in a while, and it's not about the trash or the dishes. It's showing your spouse you love them and you want to serve them, that you're in this with them. I think there are some simple acts, like obviously emptying the trash is probably not going to solve the problems in your marriage, but I think it's a good first step to begin going, hey, same team. Like we are on the same team. So
I would say for us over the years where we've seen seasons where we're like, wow, we're like in a new level. It would be we're saying things that we were just taking for granted.
That's right.
Like you're beautiful and I love you and you're special in this way or whatever. Those kinds of things that are relational.
Right.
Not just functional house type stuff. Those are good.
Yeah.
If those aren't there, then you found your main issue.
Right. But I agree. The conversations that you have, I love it when Christy calls me.
The things left assumed are gonna. I heard someone say that things left assumed are gonna cause you doom. Like that's just what I heard. That's what I heard somebody, because like in most cases, if you're going to assume something, and really anything, at some point you're going to land on your face, especially if you're assuming something like in your marriage of, like you said, like, oh, well, of course they think that. Of course they know that I think that.
I told them in our wedding.
It's not that they don't know, like in logic. Like, on paper, they know that. But emotionally, they don't, because you haven't said it. They don't, because I haven't said it, whatever the case is. So like if you're leaving something assumed, don't assume that. God forbid we be a little bit overzealous in that aspect. I would let your spouse say, hey, you're please cut off the compliments a little bit, or like, hey, please be a little bit less emotionally relational to me. That would be, please stop doing accessible. That. Like you're being too open. Like I don't think that's the problems that we're facing. I think it's like I don't know how often it is like selfish. It's just like, obviously we've talked about this, and we were talking about like some stuff when we were doing the one anothering of, I don't know how often it comes from a place of, oh, I just hate that person. Those marriages are out there.
They are.
Sure.
But a lot of it's like you come home and you have umpteen kids. Like I think all of us can understand and level with the fact of like, there's a lot. And it's
Life's
easy.
busy.
Yeah, it's easy to let that significant other's like, hey, this is so easy and like we're making it work. So I just don't have anything left.
Right.
Like I think by and large, like at some point that's where it starts. I think the snowball can end somewhere else. But a lot of it is like just the intentionality behind it.
I was going to say that's really what we're talking about, is intentionality here.
Yeah, when our kids were real little, that's when I realized how horrible I was at all of that. Because I was working 12-hour shifts in the factory, and it's hot as hell in the factory all day. It was nasty. So by the time I get home, we got these little kids running around and they're psychos, and she's been with them all day. So she's like, I'm done with them. You take them. I'm like, are you kidding me? So it was just a recipe. So a friend of mine was like, hey, look, here's the deal. Like, how long's your commute? I'm like, 25 minutes to half an hour every day. He's like, great. That's perfect. Between the time you get in your car and the time you get home, you can sort of, unlayer all of this stuff. So when you get in the door, you're able to jump into whatever. You're able to give her a hug and stand there and talk. You're able to say, how's your day? And listen.
Right.
So it was like I had to start actually intentionally on my way home, just like hanging things up. Like, I'm leaving that there. I'm leaving this there. I'm probably going to walk in the door. Is this going to happen? I'm trying to get myself ready to be available to my kids who need a dad and my wife who needs her husband. I would also say that one of the things we learned a long time ago, and for some Christians, it's going to shock them, stop centering your home around your kids. Stop centering your home around your kids. The corner office of your life, it does not have a kid sitting in the corner office. The marriage is the center of the family, not the kids.
Right.
And so Genesis 2:24, you leave your father and your mother, you hold fast to your wife, the two become one flesh. That's the center. That's ground zero. That's where God is investing. The kids are after that. So if you have a marriage-centered family, the best thing you could do for your kids is let them see that you love your spouse.
That's exactly right.
And learn how to do that and learn how to explain. And even when you get in fights and things are not going great, do all of those things in a way that shows the kids how this is done in a healthy way. But in marriage-centered home, it's the wisest thing ever, because that's the best gift you can give your kids is to love your spouse, as God wants you to.
Yeah, a couple of comments on what you just said there. I remember coming home one day, and it's like you talk about. You've been working all day, you're exhausted.
Got nothing.
The kids are young. The second you walk in there, you're walking into a potential minefield just based on what's been happening at home.
Yep.
And I remember going, just like I was sitting in the driveway, and I was just like, God, I don't have the strength to do this. And the Lord kind of whispered to me, and again, I'm not saying like out loud or anything, but like, no, you don't. That's and right. It's in those instances where we can look to the Holy Spirit for strength to rely on Him. And so if you feel like you don't have what it takes, here's great news. You don't. But through our weakness, the Lord's strength is made perfect.
That's exactly.
And so when we go to the Lord, when we pray, again, throw up a quick prayer, listen to a worship song on the way home, do something, going, God, give me what I need. And then I think you'll be surprised by how much more patience and how much more strength and how much more resilience you have then to walk into some of those situations. Yeah. And then your point there about loving your spouse is the best thing you can do for your kids. 100%, man. I mean, I kind of jokingly tell my kids, I'm like, hey, you're going to leave me one day. She made a commitment in front of a bunch of folks that she wouldn't.
That's exactly
so
right.
like I love my kids and they are definitely a priority, and we sacrifice for them. But Christy is my priority. Like, and the best thing for my children to see is me love my wife well, not just so that they can feel stability. And there's all kinds of studies done on marriages that are stable, what that does to help kids out, but so that they understand what they should be looking for and expecting when they grow up.
That's right.
And so and again, there's sin, there's mistakes, things happen, there's methods of dealing with all of those things. So I'm not trying to throw stones at anyone that doesn't have a perfect marriage, because none of us do. Yeah. But that's why, in part why we're doing the series, right, is to kind of help equip folks, not just for our marriages, but also to continue that legacy of what marriage should look like.
Yeah, I think everyone would agree that it seems like spiritual forces of darkness are really bent on wrecking marriages, right? And it makes sense, because the marriage shapes the kids. It shapes the couple. It shapes so much. So if a marriage can shape the partners in the marriage, if it can shape the children, all of that, according to God's desire and design, that's world changing. That's what God wants. So if you can attack that, you can go the other way. You can use a marriage to beat the hell out of each other, to abuse each other, to create a warped environment where these kids live they grow up in a house of funhouse mirrors. So all they've ever seen of themselves are distorted reflections because of the brokenness of the parents. And the wheels on the bus go round and round, and cycle after cycle, generation after generation. You could launch curses through generations if you could get control of marriages. And the thing is, it's subtle. It doesn't take a lot to do that. Just make the marriage about you. Make the marriage about me.
Oh, that's good.
Not about us before God. That's anything but that. And you can beat the hell out of a couple. You can beat these kids. You can warp everybody. You can cause all kinds of havoc and still go to church and still be involved in religious activities and wear Christian, shirts and have bumper stickers.
And the power of our words in that. Because we're not even talking about a physical beating here, although we're talking about emotional, the things that you say.
Psychological.
And for me, man, that is the hardest thing, because I am so quick to want to respond or do something. Early in our marriage, Christy and I had to learn how to fight, because fighting is not necessarily unhealthy at times. Like, you need to be able to have conversations.
That's right.
But you need to fight in that healthy way. Because I grew up very snarky, very sarcastic, and after we got married, I remember Christy did something to hurt my feelings, and I responded, and all of a sudden I hear her like crying over there, and I'm like, what have I done? The power of our words. And so especially with our spouses, whether they be our husbands or our wives and our children, it's such a big deal.
If you look up the root word, I think it's in the Latin of sarcasm. It means cut. It's like a little cut.
Bob Goff is a big fan of teaching about this, and I talk about it all the time when I read some of his books, and it's like,
Goff's amazing.
Oh my goodness, because he's like, hey, sarcasm, no,
that's right.
Like, there's no place for that. If you want to love somebody, talking about like everybody always and love does all of those things. If you want to love someone well, stop being sarcastic. And when you we'll talk about more of this about when we get to when we talk about like the D word and divorce and things like that. But like, as someone who is like walking through the back end of that process of like my parents split up, and it was my dad was a pastor. My dad worked at a Christian school. Our parents were in church. I've said it multiple times. I heard an old evangelist say like my brother and sister-in-law, like we had a drug problem as kids. Like anytime the church was open, we got drugged there. It's just kind of what happened.
Say no to drugs.
It is everything that ever happened. But like I remember one of the most like, I will say mental breakdowns. I remember one of the most anxious moments of my life was like the week before I got married. And it had absolutely nothing to do with my wife, who I love more than anything. But it had everything to do with the fact of like, I don't know how to do this well. Mm-hmm. I'm going to screw this up. Uh-huh. I'm going to suck at this. Uh-huh. My biggest fear in everything. My biggest fear is my marriage, or is for my marriage to start like my parents' marriage, and which was also both my grandparents' marriage, which is all like I can sit there. I promise you, I can sit there and list through both my grandparents divorced, like my mom's parents, dad's divorced, my parents divorced. Wow. Like I can literally walk through the whole thing. I've told Jesse like you're gonna have to kill me. Like we're breaking it. Like I don't know how. But
and
like,
she said okay.
It will end differently.
Genuinely, it's literally my favorite. My biggest fear is my marriage turning into that, or me being as a dad turning into. And I love both my parents. I had a by and large a good childhood, had good parents, but like the not so great things, I'm telling you, and I see it with students each and every week. The way that your house operates shapes the future of your kids, like the trajectory of their life.
That's exactly
I'm telling you, like I cannot say that, and like we're talking about it, and I don't want to get emotional, but like it sucks, it hurts, it's painful because every other major decision you're like, I don't know how to do this well. I'm just going to self-destruct. I don't have a baseline for this. That's why this is so important to get your household in order, because that sounds so orderly, but like to do this well and to start the change, because like, yes, your marriage matters, your spouse matters, but like the fallout of this is like, it will affect your kids for generations to come. And like, I'm a byproduct of that and it sucks.
Well, let's unpack this a little bit more, because, you know, the vast majority of, and I don't want to dig too deep into this idea of divorce, because I know we're going to get to that in week 4. But the vast majority of divorces that happen, you know, at least in the United States, they cite irreconcilable differences. Right. And I love the Leo Tolstoy quote that you used about that a happy marriage is ultimately about how you deal with incompatibility in your marriage. And so let me ask you this, you know, knowing that incompatibility, it's a big deal and a lot of folks are citing that. Are there some incompatibilities that are too much to deal with in marriage? And what does the Bible say about major issues that come up in our marriage, these incompatibilities that we feel like are just too much?
I would say there are incompatibilities that can be derailers. And if you don't know what they are, you might think this is okay, I'm the way I am and that's fine, without realizing, no, it's a derailer. That will ruin your marriage. If you do that, sarcasm. If you operate from sarcasm often, over the course of time, you will cut so much.
It's going to rot at somebody.
There won't be nothing left. There'll come a day where it all just falls apart. So that's not a good thing to operate. That could be a derailer down the road. One of the things I did for years when after a while, when couples want to do marriage counseling, you get so many of them coming your way. And as a church planter, I had a small staff, me and a couple people. We had to figure out how to vet people. So I found this it might even be 40 page. It's a big, it's like I think it's a campus crusade for Christ, where you focus on the family, like a marriage, checkup sheet. And it's about 40 pages. Wow. It's intense.
It sounds like it.
Describe your parents' relationship. How did your parents fight? Whatever. So they do all this. First time I read that, I'm like, I want to know this stuff. So I started making it a prerequisite for marriage counseling. So a couple would go, hey, we want to do counseling. Great. Here's how this works. I will send you a PDF. You print 2 copies. You have one. You fill out every page. And our first visit, you will email that in. And then as I read them, then I'll get back to you and we'll schedule a time. That way, if they don't fill it out, then great. Sure. It's on them.
Sure.
That was kind of what I was just after. Really. I was just vetting it, right? So they'd fill these things out. And I would literally take them and set them side by side and go through. My God, they were so telling, because you get everything, how your parents fight, how you fight. So back to your question. One example would be how you fight. There are some of us, we grow up in a house where you stuff emotions. You don't really fight necessarily. So it's maybe a little more passive aggressive, a little more indirect, a little more to turn the stuff inward. And then, so the other person wouldn't really know what you're dealing with or how it's going, but you're getting eaten up inside. And then one day that all comes out and they're like, I don't know how to deal with that. It's all been stored up. So it becomes hard to handle. How do you fight with a person who everything about what's happening, it doesn't make sense to you? The other person grew up in a home that everything comes out right away. It's on the table constantly, and no one's leaving the room till this is finished. That kind of stuff. So I mentioned in the message last week the old, keep your eyes, wide open before marriage and half shut afterwards. There's one of the ways you can derail a marriage is to say, no, we're fighting, we're getting this done right here, right now. It's like, really? You sure that's the right thing? Because some people in the moment are not great. They need to go away and think about it.
Yeah, go calm down for a few minutes.
But some people will not let that happen.
Yeah.
That's not right. We got to do this right here and now. And it's like, those are the incompatibilities. Yeah. How are we going to handle intense fights in the moment?
And then they try to use verses like "Don't let the sun go down on your anger," which means we can't go to bed before we get this. Right. Like, you know what? Maybe we all just need to take a nap and talk about it later.
That's right. But the one thing about that text that is super relevant is don't give the enemy an opportunity.
That's right.
Come on.
And so what I'm like, it's like, you ever give somebody a piggyback ride? It's like, hey, get on. I'll carry you around.
Yeah, earlier Matt asked me for one.
Yeah, exactly.
On the way down
I was wondering what that was about. So I'll carry you, and you just talk into my ear and just tell me what to do. So if you're going to be bitter and resentful toward your spouse, you're giving the devil a piggyback ride. Like, he's going to be on your back. You've given him, the word is foothold there.
Yeah.
So don't give the devil a foothold or an opportunity. It literally is the word for foothold. It's like piggyback ride the devil in your life.
Yeah.
You don't want him on your back. So don't have unresolved anger.
Right.
The idea of the sun going down is quoting the Old Testament, but the basic idea isn't simply a function of like, before the sun goes down, you should work this out.
Right.
It's really, don't leave it. It's got to be addressed at some point.
Right.
You can take a night and sleep on it. It's not like, oh my Lord. But so there are incompatibilities that you got to watch out for. One of them, I would just say, in a marriage, one would be how you handle distance. Some spouses could turn it into meaning. Because you haven't said something, that means all these things. And it's like, what? I would never even thought those things. So sometimes distance is a meaning maker for one person, but for the other person, they're just dumb and they're not paying attention. They don't know that they're coasting. Like I said last week, when you're coasting, you can only coast downhill. When you're coasting in your marriage, guess what? Takes no effort to coast.
Right.
Which direction are we probably heading?
Yeah.
So one person is just apathy because they're lazy, to be honest. They're just whatever until something flares up. They don't know. But then the other person has a meaning maker that turns that into 54 other things that remind them of all their rejections. So that's a derailer. So how you handle distance, how you handle anger, how you handle insults, because sometimes stuff's going to come out of your mouth and you're like, oop. And it's like, I'm going to take that back. I don't, nope, you said it. Now you're it. It's really? So we're branded on that? Just a lot of that stuff that the devil can use to hurt and wound people with. That's why I say you got to keep your eyes half shut after. 1 Peter 4:8 says, love, agape, covers a multitude of sins. 1 Corinthians 13, love keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't hang on to it and write it down and keep a rolling list.
Right.
You can't. We're grace people. So the ground zero of learning grace is in your marriage. The ground zero of learning to apply grace is in your marriage. The ground zero of learning how to need grace and learn how to walk in it and let it transform you is in your marriage.
Yeah.
All that sounds great, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
And you're going to need it.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the rubber hits the road on some of that. A small example, in my marriage. Christy likes to take some time to process, comments that I'll make. I tend to be a very fast processor. And even to this day, it's sometimes tough because I'll say something and she's thinking about it, but she's quiet. I take that as a disagreement. And I go, well, obviously you don't want to do that. And she's like, well, no, I'm just trying to think through and process what you said. And so I think part of, overcoming some of these incompatibilities is being a student of your spouse and knowing how do they process, how do they communicate, how do they think, how are they going to respond to these kinds of things. And when you do that, 99% of the arguments in our marriage are a result of miscommunication. And I think you really lower the amount of that you encounter when you in those incompatibilities when you are a student of who your spouse is.
Yeah, that's 1 Peter 3:7. Husbands, likewise, live with your wives in an understanding way.
There you go.
It literally means like according to their way, like according to who they are. Showing honor to the woman as to the weaker vessel. And it doesn't mean they're weak. It means they can't bench press what you can bench press. Right. Since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that, here's the kicker, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So if you're going to be like, not trying to understand your wife and just roll over them with whatever you want to do. At some point, God's going to be like, hey, I'm not going to listen to you because you won't lean into her.
Right.
Because you're one. The two become, as the text says, you're heirs now. You're heirs. You're united in all that I have for you. You're gonna have to slow down and move at her speed. I used to get all through the years, people in my church where, we've always been reaching lots of unchurched people, and sometimes one would come alive and off they go on the journey, and then the other one's still back here wondering about all of this, and then looking at their spouse, going, "We're religious now. What's going on?"
Right.
And so I always get the person who's new in Christ being like, "I really feel like God is, teaching me His Word. I'm learning how to pray. I'm in community and all this stuff, and I can't slow down for this, but I got to just keep going." I'm like, The pace of your spouse is the pace you need. Believe you me, running ahead of your spouse does not gain you anything. Learning how to walk with them is going to teach you more about following Jesus than running off into 5 more studies and being out 3 more nights a week because you got all these new Christian friends.
Right.
Those are good things. That's cool, but you do not leave your spouse behind because in the sovereignty of God, that's your spouse.
Yeah.
And your first steps are going to mean more to them than you running down the road into.
That's right.
So
that's
that
good.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, every time we have this conversation about, incompatibility, I always feel like I have to give the caveat. We're not talking about abuse. We're not talking about, we're talking about the 99% of issues that most marriages face and how to overcome
different.
them.
They're wired different. One's a night owl, the other's an early bird. One says it's only 10 p.m. The other says it's already 10 p.m. And then they're married, and that's what you got. And then different backgrounds, different wounds, different all that stuff. That's what we're talking about. So I would say anytime you feel like this person is hurting you, physically, obviously, you need to pick up the phone and reach out. That's not acceptable. That is not acceptable.
And that's where, reach out to a pastor, reach out to someone that can help you out.
Right.
That's what we're here for.
Yep.
But what we're addressing here is the vast majority of what we're talking, and not saying that they're not serious, deep, cutting issues, but I always feel like we have to give that caveat because we want to make sure that folks understand how we're kind of how we're approaching this.
So the part that we're going to get to before we wrap up is I said in the meeting that we have on Thursdays where Jim kind of goes over all of the teachings of whoever's teaching that next Sunday, kind of talks about it like everything was going really well. And then we hit this moment in the summer, we get pushed off a cliff, but not in a negative way, but in a way that's like, oh my gosh, that's incredibly daunting.
But he was like, hey, look over here, isn't this great? Yeah. Push.
You said hiding and blaming and competing. And when you mention these things, and talked through them, maybe not for everybody else, but for me, it's like, well, crap, it's one of those things where I can take a measurable list of things that I can look at. I don't know if it's just being a guy or whatever, but it's like, hey, I've done that one, and I've done when I've got a checklist. I'm very checklist. That's how my brain works. I was like, okay, I just filled out this checklist, and it's not a good thing. It is not good that I have settled into these moments before. And so I guess following up the question is so if we see that those things are in our life, that there's been moments where we've hit stuff. There's been moments where our primary way that we communicate is blaming our spouse. And the primary way that our drive or functioning with our spouse is we want to compete with them, that we've got to outscore them. We're taking that team thing to a completely different idea. Yeah. How do we repent and confess from that? How do I approach that with my spouse before, and how do I approach that with God if I'm a practicing believer, knowing that I've done that? What's the repentance and confession process? How do we come back from that?
I'd say step one is and again, this has been, Rose and I have cycled around this over and over. 34 years of being married, 38 together, so we've been around this thing a few times. The really real feedback from your life is not what your friends are telling you. That's not real. They don't know you. They know enough of you. They don't know enough to reject you completely yet. Your spouse does. The really real feedback about where you're really at is your spouse. Now, you may not like that, but the reality is they're with you. They see you. They've come to know more and more of who you really are, and your guard comes down, and they see more and more. When they're telling you something's off, that's the moment of truth, because, they're saying it because they want to hurt you because you hurt them, and now we're in the hurt each other cycle. Oh, okay. That doesn't address the point. They see something that no one else even has access to. The people on your job that think you're awesome, they don't know you. They know the you on the job you. They don't know the jackass you at home who sometimes uses sarcasm in an inappropriate way or other things.
Gaslighting. I mean, just the whole list of things.
On and on it goes. So I would say this first step is let the difficult feedback of your marriage give it more weight than just it's another person's feedback and I don't have to deal with that. No, you should let that have more weight than anybody else's feedback because they know you the most.
Right.
That's hard because then you go, well, then according to them, I have tendencies of this. Right. Now let's take that to prayer. Let's take that to our conversations with each other going, hey, man, I don't want to be that way. Help me not be that way. How can I help you help me and you help me help you? And that's what we should be trying to do. For some reason, the hiding from the Genesis 3 in the fall, hiding, blaming, and competing, where are we ever going to grow out of our hiding? It's in our marriage because that's the only place where you'll be seen. No one else is going to see you that way. Where do we grow beyond blaming? In our marriage. It can't be out some other environment because we don't live out in that environment. We live in our marriage. So that's the place that God wants to use to reveal the depths of our hiding, our blaming, or our competing, and give us the grace and the empowerment through the Spirit and the opportunity with our partner to learn to live beyond it. But we have to let that negative feedback have weight. And often in marriages, it don't. I mean, I've done marriage counseling with people. I've been in it with my wife. There's something about guard goes up and you don't want to receive the negative feedback from your marriage that says, hey, you're a clown. Like you're acting like a clown these days. Yeah. Or, hey, you're really disengaged. You need to engage. Or, hey, this tendency is legit. You need to ask forgiveness for that tendency. You need to, tell the other person, like, hey, help me catch this. I don't want to be this way. We need to help each other grow. And it really starts with letting the feedback be the feedback. And that's the first thing I see couples just sort of avoid. They don't want to feel the blow of that feedback because I think it probably hurts too much because it's obviously coming very close to home. So
I think your point you made there about how your spouse is the one that really knows you, that's such an important point. And yet we also do know God's given us one another to help encourage each other in marriages and all that. And we're doing kind of a unique thing here at Vaughn Forest Church, launching out of the series called Marriage Mentors. Yes. And so I really want to unpack that a little bit. So can you explain to me what marriage mentors are and what's the goal of this new kind of ministry?
So if two are one, if the two who get married are now one together in God's eyes, wouldn't it be that God would use you at some point in your lives to make a huge impact in the life of others as a couple? Well, where can you, as a couple, make an impact on others? There are a lot of ways you can do it, but I think one of the great ways is from your marriage to another marriage. So as a couple, put your arm around another couple that's just a little bit behind on the journey or newer on the journey and just simply walk with them. Take those lessons that you had to learn the hard way. You freely learn from God, and I'll freely give to others. So just simply walk with them, going, "Hey, here's how we've done that." So we're inviting people to request mentors, and we're inviting people to get mentor training. And we're trying to pair them up. Rose and I have benefited more from marriage mentors than from anything, because when we go to counseling, we get feedback, and it's always been very, very helpful. It's a different angle. It's helpful in a different way. But we walk these things out in relationships with others. Right. So small groups are great, discipling, all that's good stuff. But having a couple that walks with you, that watches you, gives you feedback, calls you out, it's just a life-giving thing. So really we're praying for a lot of marriages and mentors to come together. We've done that. In fact, I've been in all the small group situations I sit in these days, I'm pitching this over and over. Hey, those of you in this group, you're around, it's like, you've been through it as a couple. I want you to consider being a marriage mentor because earlier we talked about spiritual forces of darkness are at work to make marriages unhealthy, because that will jack those people up, jack those kids up, and keep the generational curses going strong. If you as a couple enter into discipling relationship with another couple and just walk with them, you can you can be a part of breaking generational curses. You can be a part of breaking a cycle and changing generations, So it's a high impact ministry. So I would recommend, as a couple, there's a lot of things I do in ministry. Rose does. We do individual things. That's great. We look at it, we cheer each other on. But it's when we're doing things as a couple, from a couple to a couple, so meaningful,
And so if folks want to get involved with that, what's the best way? If you want to either be trained as a marriage mentor couple or get mentorship from a marriage mentor couple?
Yeah, the easiest thing would be email us at marriage@vaughnforest.com and just indicate which side of that you're on. We might use a marriage couple. So we're requesting a mentor couple. Or on the other side, hey, we've been through hell. We would like to share what we've learned and help others avoid the mistakes that we made. So we would like to mentor. So, marriage@vaughnforest.com.
Marriage@vaughnforest.com.
And you tell us which side of it you're on. We're going through hell, need a mentor. Right. We've been through hell, would like to mentor. Either way.
We got a spot for you.
That's right.
That's great.
That's right.
Well, gentlemen, this has been an excellent conversation, a great kickoff to the series. Like you said, this Sunday we're going to be continuing talking about Mr. Right.
That's
right. 9:30 and 11 o'clock
He'll be here.
Mr. Wright will be here.
I don't know. Just maybe.
He will. He will.
Here's hoping.
Where two or more gather, he tends to show up.
That's right. So on campus at 9:30 or 11, you can always join us online if you're traveling or if you're sick or something like that. Maybe the car doesn't start. You know, you can join us online, vaughnforest.com.
Right.
But looking forward to that. And well, thank you for the conversation, guys. And we appreciate you joining us for the 101st episode of the Other Six podcast. So on behalf of Jim Botts, Matt Aldridge, Sound Guy Jonathan, myself, thanks for being here, and we will catch you guys next time.